Welcome into the Weather Wednesday podcast here at New England Storm Center. So, I hope you like gray. That's for sure. It has been cool, cloudy, and unsettled, to say the least, for the most part over the past few days. We did get a little break yesterday on Tuesday. Most of us did. Maine was still stuck in the thick of it, most of Maine. Uh, I, I, I kind of thought we had dodged a bullet in April when a stalled frontal boundary came through, but it was a mild one. It was mostly cloudy to partly cloudy in the middle of April, and temperatures were seasonable for the time of year. But this was going to happen eventually, especially after such a nice May. And we had long stretches of sunny and dry and mild weather in May and even April too. And when I say that, I'm not like saying, it's karma that we had such a beautiful May for the most part, that we can't have a nice June too. That's not what I'm saying. It's basically the transition from winter to summer forces this pattern to happen as the polar jet stream retreats northward back into Canada. And as that happens, the you don't have that stream to push the storms along, so they can stall out. And it happens every spring. It's going to happen every spring. It's just where New England is in the world that this has to happen for the transition from winter to summer to occur at some point here in the spring. Of course, we did have a similar setup in late April and early May when that was during the Omega block, when the main difference with that one was the low pressure was stalled just to our west in New York. This one stalled in Nova Scotia, around Nova Scotia. Speaking of which, if you want to find a silver lining to this really crummy pattern, it's that this storm, this stalled out low pressure system, has been dumping rain on Nova Scotia, and as of yesterday, the wildfires out there that sent plumes of smoke into New England are now 100% contained. So there is a silver lining to this crummy weather pattern for New England. So you can think on the positive side on that front. So yeah, it is, as I've written over the past week, it is a less than ideal pattern, but it is a spring-like pattern for New England. It's just, a lot of the times it happens in April and May, and now that we're into June, you hope to get past it, but it arrived here in June, so what are you gonna do? It's here. It is what I called a pseudo omega block. It's not really a full omega block like your very typical omega block that you can see that we had in late April and early May. That was a textbook definition quintessential omega block. This one, not quite as tight, but it is a blocked up pattern nonetheless, which has dominated New England's spring weather. We've had the Greenland block early on, we had the Omega block, we even got into a Rex block for Memorial Weekend, and now we're into this pseudo Omega block, as I like to call it. So, a big driver of this forecast and this setup has to do with North Atlantic Oscillation, or NAO. The NAO index has been entrenched in a negative phase as of late. A weaker NAO, or a negative phase, allows cooler air into the northeast, while a stronger NAO, or a positive phase, favors warmer weather into the northeast and really the entire east coast of the United States. So basically, a stronger or positive NAO keeps cold air locked up toward the North Pole, where a weaker or negative NAO can allow for the colder air to shoot down further south, say into New England. With that said, the NAO index does look to stay below zero through at least late June. Of course, that doesn't mean that, every single day throughout all of June will be cold. There are many, many factors that go into determining high temperatures for any given place on any given day, and NAO is just one of those players, but it is a big player. So with that said, this pattern does look to break down over this weekend, at least briefly, as conditions will allow for the cutoff low to finally push eastward into the middle of the North Atlantic, away from New England. Sunday is looking great. Partly cloudy skies for the region. Everyone should be into the 70s, so there's your day right there. There is a new low that looks like it's going to track across the country next week, and it could bring New England a decent rainfall. It could also become cut off, leading to another unsettled week. Unfortunately, I don't want to say it, but it's a real possibility at this time. It's not set in stone, but we can also go back to the NAO, which for this weekend does go back to what's called NAO neutral, and that plays into the pattern breakdown that we're going to have over the weekend. But shortly after it gets to neutral conditions, it is going to go back negative, and that would favor another low next week getting cut off and hanging around New England. But we will have to continue watching the forecast and see exactly what happens on that front. The position of that low pressure, and what is really set in stone is that there is going to be a low pressure. Exactly where it positions itself around New England is going to really determine what New England's weather is going to be next week. And of course, if it does get cut off and hang around, again, we'll have to keep watching the forecast. So this Friday, June 9th, marks the 70th anniversary of the 1953 Worcester tornado. This was one of the worst, if not the worst, tornado to ever strike New England. So here's a look back at this tornado and some of the devastation that it caused. On June 9th, 1953, one of the most powerful tornadoes in the region's history struck. This tornado would cause over $50 million in damages and kill 94 people, making it the deadliest tornado in New England history. The tornado would injure well over 1,000 people. The tornado is estimated to have had a strength of F4. The tornado dropped into the Quabbin Reservoir and quickly began to track in a southeast direction. The tornado tore through the towns of Barre and Rutland while quickly gaining strength. The tornado began to cause devastation when it entered into Holden, completely wiping out an entire neighborhood. After Holden, the tornado, now 1 mile wide, entered into Worcester. The scale of devastation this storm inflicted in the city is hard to put into words. The scenes of Worcester on June 10, 1953, resemble scenes from many of the United States' other extreme tornadoes. Large neighborhoods were completely erased from existence. A large bus was picked up and thrown into an apartment complex. The tornado would not stop after devastating Worcester. At maximum strength and still a mile wide, the tornado tore through Shrewsbury and Westboro. After 84 minutes of havoc, the tornado dissipated. It traveled a total of 48 miles, making it the second longest track tornado in New England history. This tornado prompted an overhaul of the Storm Prediction Center's tornado warning system. 3 other tornadoes touched down in New England on this day, including an estimated F3 just south of Worcester. Another powerful tornado touched down in Rockingham County, New Hampshire, causing damage in Exeter and Fremont. The 4th tornado was a much weaker one in Strafford County, New Hampshire. And for you curious ones out there, I know I said the second longest track tornado in New England history. The longest track tornado in New England history was the 2008 New Hampshire tornado that tore through. It actually affected 5 counties across New Hampshire. Rockingham and Strafford County being the most affected ones. That tornado tracked for 50 miles, just 2 miles more than the 1953 Worcester tornado. So, on to the resort roundup, and that's a wrap. Killington closed down for skiing on Thursday, June 1st, so they did manage to push into June for the second year in a row, despite 2 rather uncooperative winters for the most part. Of course, the cold March with that blockbuster snowstorm certainly helped Killington and many other ski resorts. Actually, of the 42 resorts we monitor, only 4 resorts closed earlier than they did last year. Again, very surprising considering how really bleak the situation was looking going into March. And then, as I just said, March happened and changed that. 19 resorts were able to push further than they did last season. And the other 18 resorts closed on the same weekend, likely sticking to a pre scheduled closing date. But there were a handful of resorts that did offer bonus weekends and push past their tentative closing dates. Again, 19 closing later than they did last year. Very impressive, and that really shows you just how much that mid-March blockbuster snowstorm really helped the resorts. Many resorts picked up well over 2 feet of snow in that storm. So this is the final resort roundup of the season, but we will be back at it next March 2024. We'll have to see what that winter's like. That's way off in the distance, though, so we'll leave that there. So with all of that said, that's going to do it for this edition of the Weather Wednesday podcast here at New England Storm Center. So thank you for listening, thank you for watching, and you will hear from me again next Wednesday.